So my name is Megan Dolby, and I was trained in Syracuse, New York, where I went to college at Onondaga Community College. And I was trained by Lisa Monday and Eric Lisa. Lisa is a Quaker and works for the American Friends Service Committee. And Eric, I believe, works with a grant that was given by many different youth empowerment projects and a bunch of different philanthropic organizations for youth service and whatnot. And he works with the Help Increase the Peace Project, which is what our HIP catchphrase is named after. So I got involved in HIP because I had heard about a possible peer mediation center that was going to start on campus. And basically, I think that is one of the goals of HIP, is to infiltrate the school system first by, presenting HIP to administrators and faculty or teachers or staff, what have you. And we try to start a core group with a lot of different people. We opened it up to the entire community, really. We've had, at OCC, we had faculty members, we had secretaries, we had students as myself, and we also had people from the community who had heard about HIP from friends or who had worked with community groups. So it was a real diverse group that we had come to OCC, which made it nice because it wasn't just, us talking to each other. It was really a community setting, so that made it really nice. And it is 3 workshops. There's a basic, advanced, and a trainer for trainer. And it's a little over 60 hours of training altogether. But for those of you who are CCRC trained, I think that you don't need to take the basic. I think we would just focus on the advanced and trainer for trainer, and maybe give you the techniques that we have, or maybe we could meld some together that you've already learned. But if you don't already know, HIP came out of a project called Alternatives to Violence, and CCRC was definitely an influence. As I was reading through the manual really quickly to refresh my memory, a lot of the communication and affirmation and community building skills that you have developed in your exercises and whatnot, we've adapted to the HIP program, along with this AVP program that was started, I believe it was by the Quakers in the prison system, and a lot of there's an overwhelming response. The prisoners wanted this program to be taken to the kids. They feel that if they had been given these tools, and I do emphasize that these are tools, it's not an answer. Eric and Lisa would tell us right off the bat, this is not a self-help group. We are not teachers. We facilitate a process. And that's what I thought was really neat, I think, because when kids hear that, when they, I gotta go to this thing, and usually they're voluntarily coming. We have gone into situations where we went into a group. It was a detention facility, so but most of the kids are very willing to come, but when they hear that it's not necessarily something where I do all the talking and you do all the listening, where they can really interact, they're much more open to the experience. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, a big one, but a nutshell about me and what I'm doing. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? You can start over here.
My name is Richard. And I'm really here for the overview. I wouldn't expect to go into a more advanced, because I don't work with kids on a regular basis, so it's kind of sporadic.
Okay.
I call myself a justice advocate or justice minister. And, my major focus at this point is working toward development of what we call a Justice 2000 plan, which would be the city of Grand Rapids appointing a committee to look at all the justice issues in the city and how they relate to city functions, and for the eventually make some recommendations for them to be implemented. It's very broad. It would deal with all the kinds of racism and sexism and historical injustices, etc. So it's important to me to know about a little bit about some of the different possibilities with kids and with everybody else.
Sure.
In doing what I'm doing. Plus, just in some cases dealing with, in my case, kids in the community on the corner who are out there doing drugs and selling drugs because that's all they see that they have to do, or occasionally in jail because I'm out of jail as part of pushing for this project. There's a lot of resistance.
Sure.
So it may be a little come from an unusual perspective for you probably, but I think getting into the community, which CCRC has been trying to do too, is real necessary. I went through the basic CCRC training just this summer. Judy's my partner. Judy had told me about it for years, so I'd known about it, but I hadn't, experienced it, and I was impressed. And so, I'd like to just hear more about what it does as far as the older young people, teenager
Sure.
group. So that's basically where I'm.
Okay.
My name is Wenda Four, and I'm involved in a variety of things. I've been a volunteer with Camp Fire for nearly 30 years and became really active in a new peace program that they put together in 1983, introduced it in this area, and have been doing some workshops in the past and some peace weekends and things like that. Currently, I'm an education youth director at a church. I've been there for about 15 years, and I work with all ages, but primarily in a teaching capacity with junior high and high school. And I am a CCRC trainer, and also part of Global Resources Group out of IGE. And probably have been most active with the CCRC in terms of using it in a variety of ways in workshops, in retreats, and things like that the last few years with adult groups at church as well as with the young people, and then also, like I say, working with Camp Fire to some degree yet on the Peace Project. And there's been some updates on that, and I probably will be doing something after this next year is over. I've got 1 year left in school, and then hopefully I'll have more time to put back into the peace issues. And I was interested in HIP because anything that builds on what we already know for CCRC or anything else I've been working with in the peace area is important to me, and I was interested in that.
My name is Jeanette Hayes, and I've had the CCRC basic and we call it training for trainers. And like Wenda, I'm interested in seeing how I might build on some of those things. I'm not in a school setting. I am retired. I will probably be doing some volunteer work with children at an inner city facility. I'm also interested in how we might do peace activities in our neighborhoods. I live in this neighborhood, and there's increasing concern about providing alternatives to violence for youth who live in this neighborhood. I'm also an IGE member.
I'm Kathy Kanu-Thompson, and I probably started this whole process when I went through a seminar called the Institute for the Healing of Racism. And from there, I went into the peace training because of going into education, and I worked at the YMCA with children. And that was a problem I kept seeing, the reaction was fighting. So I went to the CCRC and got trained, and I wanted to see this because of the additional training, and I'll be in an education setting in the fall, so I'm looking forward to it. I've used a lot of the CCRC. The kids seem to react well to that.
Judy Bookman, and I'm a Quaker, and so I had heard about CCRC a long time ago and helped to bring it here about 7 years ago, I think it's been. And I'm really sold on the concept, the circle, and the whole premise, and have heard a lot about the alternatives to violence. But then when I saw the HIP, I really thought that would complement nicely what we're already doing. And in lots of settings, I mean, we work in the schools and neighborhoods and churches, but like when I was sharing with Richard some of the things for Global 2000, one of the things we're talking about is a city committee that'd be really creative. And I thought, well, the work we're doing and some of the activities that were in HIP, are the kinds of things we need to take to those kind of committees too. And that's one of the reasons I kind of encouraged Richard to come, because I think it's thinking in new ways and looking at problem solving in new ways. And if we can do it at all the different layers, I think we really have some impact to change society. So for many different reasons. I work here too with the Global Resources, which does, we feature the CCRC in the conflict resolution, but also global issues, classroom techniques and things you could do to help, build a peaceful classroom and so on.
I'm Carrie, and I taught inner city in Grand Rapids here for 17 years or so, and retired a while back and had the tremendous good fortune of meeting these people who are doing so much real cutting-edge pioneer work in this direction. I think one verification of the value of their work has been that the city schools now have a CCRC program, isn't that correct?
There are 2 trainers in the Grand Rapids Public School.
Yes, and they specifically deal with conflict resolution issues, which simply didn't exist when I was training to be a teacher and so on. So, yes, one of the major problems, even 20 years ago, that we were running into is that our playgrounds, our recesses, would be a long succession of kids getting sent to the office, and hours spent afterwards trying to unscramble the kinds of problems they got into. And bless their hearts, because they want and need a chance to learn the kinds of things that I keep learning every time I'm with you. So I appreciate all of you. Oh, I might say too, I did get a chance after retiring to get into public access television, and so that's what this videotaping is. Plus, it gives me a chance to, build up a library and have it available for people who wanted to be here but couldn't today.
Sure. I've been working with children since I was a junior and senior in high school, and I've seen a lot of the things that you've been talking about in terms of recesses being, our boxing matches and whatnot, and being sent to the office and having to deal with issues, having to deal with kindergartners and racism issues that they may not see at the time, but that's what it is. So I'm glad that we've all had those types of experiences, because sometimes it's difficult to facilitate a group where people don't think that those things happen, or that they haven't experienced them, and it's very difficult for them to visualize 5-year-olds fighting in a classroom, or even teenagers fighting over a test, or something just totally out of their realm, because they're not exposed to it. It's not something that they see every day. And again, I'm very open to questions. So usually when we do a training in any type of setting, and I do emphasize that any of the work that you see in the manual or HIP in general can be modified for age groups, and that goes, I'm sure, for CCRC. I have done trainings, I have done mini sessions with children as young as, I'm trying to think, I believe it was 1st or 2nd grade. I went to a youth group Wednesday night that they go and discuss the Bible, I guess, I'm not sure, but, and I came in, and it was interesting to work with children that young to see what types of violence that they see. That's something that we talk about right off the bat, is what is violence to the kids. And the things that they were coming up with, it blows me away every time I do a workshop to know what they know and what they see. So that's definitely something right off the bat that we discuss and bring out to the open, and come up with just brainstorm, just list, write down anywhere from guns to television, any weapon that you can imagine they come up with. So, and even some surprising things that spark conversation. Someone might shout out parent, and how can a parent be violent? And we also brainstorm what is nonviolence. And people come up with family, and they come up with teachers, and they come up with things that they've experienced as nonviolent. And we discuss what are some of the correlations between what is violent and what is nonviolent, and that just sometimes kids that even live in different neighborhoods and are going to the same school, how can your neighborhood be violent? I live in a neighborhood where people talk to each other and we have barbecues and it's great, and I don't see a drug dealer on my street, so it really sparks a lot of communication with the kids, and sometimes they don't even know it. It's a little intimidating, I think, for them at first too, because they may not be in a group where they know a friend or have their pal sitting right next to them, but it's also a way for people to get to know each other. I mean, when I did my basic training, I got to meet the president of the college's secretary, and I mean, that was kind of neat. She never really had much contact with students, and it was just a neat thing to have communication with different people that you may not see every day. So I think and we also encourage in the school system, which depending upon how open they are to conflict resolution, whether or not they do this, but we encourage teachers to sit in the group and participate. Sometimes they feel uncomfortable using their first name or being involved because they think it's a kid's workshop, and they don't see the necessity of them sitting in on the group. So sometimes they sit outside the group and watch, and that can make things, the kids feel like they're being spied on, and they can't be as open maybe if the teacher isn't part of the group.
See, I even tell people who want to come to our workshops, we're giving grants, they can come but only as participants. They can't come as observers because of that same reason. Do you have any trouble with teachers?
Well, it was this one experience I had at this Catholic school. It was funny. After a while, because I was getting into it and I was talking and the kids were shouting out things for our brainstorm, and all of a sudden I looked up, we were in a basement, and there were 3 teachers sitting on the steps just kind of peeking through the, and I was just kind of, the kids were all facing me so they couldn't see, so I just kept going. But that can make a situation, I could tell that, and if 2 of them sitting together, if they started to scuffle about, whatever, they started giggling if they talked about maybe something that they had seen on TV that may not have been appropriate for Sunday school, but, when they started to go back and forth, and the teacher stood right up and said, "Oh, no, stop that, we're supposed to be listening to," and it was just kind of like, so that's why we try to involve everyone, so things like that don't happen, but you just kind of go with the flow. You go with what the school system or with the church or whatever they're comfortable with, because if I can just get through to the kids and maybe even to the teachers who are sitting on the steps and they hear something and they say, "Oh, that might work," then I've done my job, then I think I've gotten through. But it is so frustrating, and I laugh about it now because it was really humorous. Now it's humorous.
Well,
But,
it is surprising, though, how often we are autocratic rather than democratic.
Yeah.
And here we are, no wonder democracy flounders at 200 years, because we don't exercise it.
And because I think, I think, and kids, they pick up on that,
Sure they
and
do.
when they see that when their teacher isn't going to get involved, then it is very much well, then we have to sit up straight and we have to pay attention, and we can't say things that, that would upset our teacher and whatnot, so.
That they'll pay for later.
Yes, they may go to the principal's office.
One of the things I like about CCRC is the emphasis on listening to everyone, respecting everyone's opinion, the right to not participate, to pass if you want to pass in a group setting, kind of laying down those ground rules before we begin. And I think that would be really helpful to adults, because those things would be there for everyone. Everyone would need to respect the ground rules, so to speak.
Your ground rules are slightly different. Would you go over those?
Sure, I'm sorry. This is, like I said, this is real. I'm not exactly sure how much you know, so I kind of skipped over that. But right off the bat, before we even talk about what is violence, what is nonviolence, usually in my mini session is we go over the ground rules. We talk about good points only. We don't need to talk about last week when my sister did so-and-so. And we talk about and also positive things about ourselves. I find when we do the adjective name game, which we can do, mine's Mouthy Megan, which is, it borders on positive, but, the kids all laugh and they think it's really funny, so, it's kind of an icebreaker. And for them to think of positive things about themselves, we sit there for 15 minutes, and they say, well, I'm good at baseball. And I say, well, why don't things that are more personal, like, you're a good listener. And it's like, they don't even think of things like that, they have good humor, but usually we end up, well, I'm good at soccer, or I'm good at, so I do with what the kids are comfortable with. If they can't think of some good affirming things to say about themselves, good at soccer is good for me, and then with adults, we kind of have to keep it, we call it kiss it, keep it short and sweet. So, because I think with people, I don't want to say older people, but when you get beyond that, 15, 16 years old, you feel really uncomfortable about saying everything because people are looking at you. They can talk forever, and everyone's got problems, and they can talk about their problems all day long if you give them the time to. We try to keep it short and sweet. And another important thing that we discuss is no put-downs, because you get like those two kids that started, stop it, stupid, and no, back and forth, back and forth. So we try as hard as we can, no put-downs, and no interrupting, because I've heard teachers, I don't know how many times, if I'm going to take the time to listen to you, you're going to take the time to listen to me. And it works most of the time, although kids, they get the raise the hand thing pretty good, but shouting and, blurting out answers and whatnot is innate, and it's going to happen. But we try to, let everyone say what they want to say at least. And one of my favorites is volunteering yourself only. And it's so hard sometimes because if you know someone in the group who's gone through that thing, you say, oh, well, Mary, you've had this problem, and it's almost as if you don't mean to put that person on the spot, but it happens. And then that person, if they don't want to share that in the group, that puts them in a difficult situation. Or having the right not to participate, I think. But you can't sit outside the group. I'm going to try that, you can't come unless you're going to participate. You always have the right to pass. Although when we were at the detention facility, it seemed like as soon as we said that, everyone said, okay, I'll pass, okay, I'll pass, okay, I'll pass.
What was it you read? Because you were reading the book yesterday, the manual, and it was a little bit different. And I said, well, this really is more junior high and high school. I mean, because the way it was worded in the book was slightly different. And I thought, with junior high, I would de-emphasize the right to pass because that's the age where they would all pass, But I can't. You remember how that was?
It was indicated that you didn't have the right to pass in some of the what CCRC calls light and libraries. I forget what you call it.
Oh, yeah, you have a neat name for lifts.
Oh, hip lifts. Oh, sure. That's more of our participating, like we get up and we play a game like Big Wind Blows, or we play
kind of like our
ball.
upset the fruit basket.
Yeah, just games to get the kids running around, because sitting down and listening, and they start to fall asleep. And so, getting up and moving around, everyone participates in that. Although, Eric, it was interesting when we were working with the group at the detention facility, he said, you have the right to pass, but we'll come back to you.
That's what we do, too. I always come back after I go around, and kids may still pass, but a lot of the kids need more time to think. And in my classroom, they, if I forget to go back to the ones, they'll always remind me and say, we forgot to ask the ones who passed. So thank you. And most always, they'll have something to say.
So that was interesting. Although I think with the adult groups, usually they'll think of something to say right away. And if they do pass, unless Eric will say, well, does anyone else want to share anything? And if they don't, he leaves it at that.
Yeah.
But with kids, they oftentimes, as soon as they hear that, oh, I don't have to participate, then they will, so.
On the interrupting.
Oh, go ahead.
Define that, and let me give background on why I asked that.
Okay.
We read a book that clarified for me different people's styles of talking.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, a lot of times when women get together, they talk and there is interrupting. There's several people talking at once. It may be called interrupting, but it's not seen and felt as that way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when men typically get together, and this is a generalization, it's
Mm-hmm.
different people act different ways, but it tends to be one person speaking at a time, and if somebody comes in when the person's speaking, it is seen as interrupting.
Mm.
So I'm wondering how you're defining it in that context. So that, different people are uncomfortable with the different styles.
Sure.
I come into a group of women, I'm trained as a man, and I am uncomfortable because I feel I can't get in a word because
Especially the people I meet.
women come into, a lot of groups where I participated where there have been men, and they feel like they have to wait and can't, do that because that's the way it's structured. So I wonder, how you deal with that sort of thing.
I think when working with children, I don't think the gender issue. I think it's just everybody. If you have the chance to talk, if you have that little minute second of silence, they'll jump right in. But if I see that a child's really trying to say something, and is maybe struggling to find the words or is thinking, I can see that they're thinking and, they start to say something and then the next person, I'll say, well, well, Joey really wanted to, he wanted to say something or,
But it's my world. It's my home. Not always right. But not all wrong. And I love it. So I'm gonna stay. Make it better. Every day.
identified for me different people's styles of talking. Typically, a lot of times when women get together, they talk and there is interrupting. There's several people talking at once. It may be called interrupting, but it's not seen and felt as that way. Whereas when men typically get together, and this is a generalization, it's different people act different ways, but it tends to be one person speaking at a time, and if somebody comes in when the person's speaking, it is seen as interrupting. So I'm wondering how you're defining it in that context. So that, different people are uncomfortable with the different styles.
Sure.
I come into a group of women, I'm trained as a man, and I am uncomfortable because I feel I can't get in a word. Because
Especially with people like me.
Women come into, a lot of groups where I participated where there have been men, and they feel like they have to wait and can't, do that because that's the way it's structured. So I wonder, how you deal with that sort of thing.
I think when working with children, I don't think the gender issue. I think it's just everybody. If you have the chance to talk, if you have that little minute second of silence, they'll jump right in. But if I see that a child's really trying to say something, and is maybe struggling to find the words or is thinking, I can see that they're thinking and, they start to say something and then the next person, I'll say, well, Joey really wanted to, he wanted to say something or, I don't know, I just deal with it as it happens. I don't really have a defined, what is interrupting. If I'm talking and then someone else starts to talk, I find that, disrespectful, and if, obviously if they're talking, that's one of the good listening skills that I've learned from conflict resolution is that there's a difference between listening and hearing. A very big difference that, and I found myself a hearer more than a listener. And that when you're sitting in a group setting like this, and it's difficult when you're the next person, you have to think of something to say, but you're trying to listen to the person who's talking. And the kids, they don't, well, hearing and listening is the same thing, but, just trying not to think of something to say and really, well, we need to respect Joey and what he's saying. And I'll stop the group. I did a couple of times in the youth sessions to try and keep the teacher at bay that was sitting outside the group and said, okay, time out, too many people are talking at once and we need to, respect the circle as we go around. And, but I find also that if someone's uncomfortable with talking about something, then they'll go off on some tangent and start being really disruptive. So I just deal with it as it comes, and the kids, if they see that they can't get away with with passing and with the other things, and if their teacher's participating or has maybe gone out of the room and decided not to participate at all, I find that the kids give me more respect because they don't feel that they have to show off and be bad. But I guess I never heard of that male-female gender thing. But maybe that's because I'm a woman. I don't know. But that's interesting, and I'll see if I can come up with a definition. But
it sounds like the focus is more one person speaking at a time, generally.
yeah, that's the way I've always seen it. But I think another thing that I don't necessarily call timeouts, we call it a buzzword. And everyone in the group comes up with chocolate or Gumby or something that all the kids know that when that's said, everyone is supposed to just stop talking and everything ceases. And a lot of teachers, they stick their finger up in the air or whatever. I know that's commonly used. But I think with the buzzword, all the kids get into it, and then I say it, and then they say it, and kind of brings us back to focus. Or if we're in groups, like if we're in 2s or 3s, and usually we have to use this with the adult groups, and it's, okay, you have 3 minutes, and it's going into like 10, when we say, okay, Gumpy, now. To bring everybody back into the group, I think that works. But with that interruption thing, got me thinking about that, and I'm going to find a definition for that. And then, like I said, kiss it. That's a good one. Keep it short and sweet.
And you actually say that when someone's kind of going on?
No, we don't say kiss it.
Oh, okay. That's just kind of in your intro.
Yeah, we, although, I'm trying to think.
That is the hardest thing when you do a workshop, because there will
It
be,
is.
one person, and the group won't like it. I mean, if you don't do something, the group will put pressure on that person, and it gets uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think the way Eric and Lisa always proposed it to us was that going on, to the advance together. So we've all been, and we know each other, and it's a more comfortable setting to talk about issues like poverty, like racism, and someone picks an issue, and they can talk about it for as long as they want. And if Eric sees that, and it happens, where this person just, it was very emotional for them to talk about. I can't even remember what it was, if it was racism. Then let that person, they obviously need to get something off their chest. If you see that it's going into something where you think they need help, I've never run into that situation, but if I see where a child is talking about an experience they've had with a babysitter or with a parent, and, like I said, I've never had that situation, but I would probably maybe stop them, and say, well, I think, we need to talk about this privately, because, I mean, that's going into whole, I just took a child abuse and recognition class, and, I think it's difficult for a child even to say something, but, I mean, I don't know.
Well, those kind of intimate things that come up for me is more in the classroom where there's a higher trust. I think when you do a workshop, it's such a short thing that if it came up then, I would be more concerned that it was being used for show than the child. Although I wouldn't want to, rule that out. I mean, it needs to be acted upon, but sometimes kids do in the classroom really share from their heart about things that need to be followed up on.
And I think a group session like that isn't an appropriate place. There's a fine line between what is it, because like I said, this is not a self-help group, and I think, you'll have some people who have, gone through very traumatic experiences, domestic violence, rape, incest, whatever, and, if that comes up, I mean, I've never had it besides just that one gentleman who, it was a very emotional experience, but everybody was okay with it, No one, I had kids talking about their brothers and sisters who were dealing drugs, and an incident where he came into his bedroom late one night, but he talked about it, and he got it out of his, he talked about it, and it was like all the kids listened, and it was okay. No one made fun of him. No one tried to, say that he was wrong for maybe not telling his parents or whatever. And I think, I don't know, I think if you see that someone is going to need help in terms of they're going on and on and on and they don't know what to do, and I would, this is an appropriate time. I think that we need to talk about this later, that kind of an issue. But again, I haven't, I've worked mostly with kids, and they just, yes, no.
I haven't really gotten anything that I couldn't handle in a workshop.
Not in a workshop. I think in working with children where we had a rap session every morning, and we were using the Campfire City Kids program.
Oh, okay.
And when we started talking about what do you like about your neighborhood and what you don't like about your neighborhood, a lot of children didn't focus on the neighborhood. They talked about their family situations. But this was a group of children that had been together, knew each other. Everyone seemed to be very accepting. For instance, one child talked about her grandfather, who's an alcoholic. I mean, and that was a very pressing issue for her. But everyone just listened and went on to the next one. But in a workshop setting with adults, no, I've really not gotten into anything.
The closest I got was a role play one time where one of the people that took the role play was a fat child, and she really identified with it, but it was a mediation kind of role play, and I was the mediator, and I could really have a lot of control of it, but it got into a lot of her own emotions, but it was worked through the mediation, so it wasn't, wasn't a problem. One of the things Rich and I noticed, I think what HIP has to offer that we don't have in CCRC is the Speak Out, some of those kind of activities, or what's the one that was a visioning? We envision justice. what's it called?
Community vision.
Community vision? Have you used that one?
I haven't.
Well, I know how, there's a lot we don't use in CCRC. We have a community building, but it's more, what's the vision of the community? And I just used that yesterday. But this one is more looking at poverty and looking at issues like that and addressing.
It's more looking at what could be from what I got.
Yeah.
What could be, but I think we don't do a lot with that, and I think this might be something, especially with junior high and high school, you would really want to get into, and I think you offer more.
What they would see in terms of like the best community that they could see in the school, that type of thing. And again, I mean, brainstorms, I think the kids, they really, if they can shout out things and not get in trouble for it, I think. But no, I think, I'm trying to think if we talked about, I think I've just done what is violence, what is nonviolence, what do kids need. I did that with a social working class at SU, and it was surprising what they all came up with. And it was kind of like, not a perfect situation for a child, but maybe it was more like a community setting. They need love, they need attention, they need positive things to do. They started naming off, like the YMCA. It went off on a huge big tangent, but it was interesting because they talked about not only affectionate things that children need in terms of, love and whatnot, but other positive school education, things like that. And it was more like a visionary kind of, if you were to give a child everything they needed, what would it be, but people can,
Yeah, you go. No, I don't know if anybody has seen the manual other than, that's why I passed it around. One of the things they talk about is the hip connection, or a theme. Maybe you could explain that to us, because that's, I think, different than what we have in CCRC, unless I'm just not understanding it right.
Sure. No, basically, usually after we do an adjective name game, whoever's sitting to the right or left of you, we usually break off into partners, and after we do a brainstorm maybe about what is violence, somebody will go up, each person in the group will go up and they'll circle a word. Like, I think I did one and I circled knife, and some kids will, police, and you'll just circle a couple of things. And then you'll sit down and you'll talk with your partner. And you do have the right to pass and things like that. But it's basically where you just discuss why you circled something, or they'll give you a topic like what I like about my ethnic heritage, something positive about my childhood. That I think there's a bunch of topics in there, but basically it's just breaking off into small groups and listening, and then depending upon what it is, like if it's like where you're going to introduce your partner, instead of me introducing myself, my partner would, and say, oh, this is Mouthy Megan. She likes to camp and swim and whatnot, or if it's something more like what is violence, what is nonviolence. If anyone wants to share after they talk to their partner, then they can share it in the group. And also what's really important about that is if they're talking about something that obviously is not necessarily depressing for them to talk about, but it brings them back to a time maybe that they've tried to bring closure to, we try to say, okay, bring them out of that, like ask them what they had for breakfast this morning, or you can see that they're talking about someone that maybe died that they loved, and maybe because they circled death or something, and you ask them what flavor of Jell-O they like, and that kind of brings them from something that was maybe very negative into just totally bringing them out of it. I had someone who didn't really like that because she said that it was not really negating, but what they were talking about, but maybe making it less important, like asking a question like that. But everyone in the group understood why that was being done, and that's really important, that you don't just do it, and someone's like, well, why are you asking me that? And I'm talking about something that's, you know.
But I could see again with junior high and high school, that, you know, that this, that they could get into some really heavy things. And that would be if they all had that agreement to begin with, but they realize, yeah, this, you know, this is, they don't want to stay there necessarily, and this helps them get out of it.
Exactly. And not, you know, and with our ground rules also, it's not necessarily listed, but although respect, I forgot to mention that, is the confidentiality issue. And that if someone in the group is talking about an experience they had recently or in the past, after the session's over, you don't need to go to that person and say, oh, by the way, how is your grandfather feeling? You know, because then that's bringing them back without their permission. You know, if they come to you and say, oh, I had a really bad day today because A, B, and C happened, you know, if they're opening up to you, that's really important that everything in the workshop is confidential.
So when you mean confidential, what you're saying that if Richard said something, I wouldn't be free to bring up his issue unless he brought it up.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a little bit different than sometimes people take it. I like that. Sometimes I have trouble with confidentiality because, I mean, certainly you want a tone where what we say is you listen from the heart and you speak from the heart. And so it's not a time to go out and tell everything that's happened in the circle. This is a time people have trusted you. But this is kind of nice because sometimes confidentiality kind of is a bind from really helping people get going.
Yeah.
But this is different. This is only the person that brings it up brings it back up.
Is that stated then so that everyone understands that?
Yes, and I'm trying to think how it was brought up in my group session. I think I may have said something to someone. I may have mentioned something before the group even started, and that's how a lot of things are dealt with, especially with our adult groups. Is if something happens in the workshop or before the workshop or whatever that makes someone feel uncomfortable, we bring it in and we talk about it right out instead of someone sitting there and festering with it, you know, and getting angry. I think it was me or maybe someone else, and Eric said, you know, confidentiality doesn't all, you know, it doesn't all stay here, but it goes with you, you know, and not only are you not supposed to talk to your, you know, boyfriend or girlfriend, say, oh, you know, this woman, and she was having such a hard time, because that's not, that person wasn't involved and maybe wouldn't understand why you were talking about those issues, or that's invading that person's, you know, trust if you're going out and you're talking about whatever happened in the group. But also, not bringing that person back to, because maybe they've already dealt with that issue. But yes, it is said, I think after that, we always, because it's something that sometimes you just forget, you know, because it's not something you think about, because you want to help that person. You know, if you saw that it was a very emotional experience, you want to make sure that that person's okay, but maybe they've already dealt with it, you know, and you don't want to bring them back to that. So, I try to, if I remember, I try to, you know, say that unless that person, you know, brings it up to you, don't go there. Don't go there. That's our.
I think it would be important, though, for working especially with middle school and high school students, that they know that if there is something that they need to talk with someone about, that there's going to be somebody available to listen to. Because I think, Judy, you're absolutely correct. You can get into some really heavy stuff that maybe only gets mentioned in the group, but that's an indication that that person really needs an opportunity to talk it out.
It seems like this is it can get a lot heavier than the CCRC. I mean, we do CCRC, I mean, Wendy's done a lot with the high school and even college age trainings. But I think it tends to be lighter all the way around, and that was one thing you kind of questioned when we did it, having more time to process and get a little deeper. And when we had that was a mixed age group, it was hard to do that. So we had junior high in that group, as well as adult who really wanted to process, like Richard would have liked to process a lot more. But then we had middle school kids that, you know, we had to get going. So sometimes, you know, that makes it a little bit harder. But then you could get a chance to come back with the adults to work on it, I think, at other times.
Do you say something in your group about the possibility of, if someone wants to talk further about something, you know, come to us, or?
Usually at the end of a session, either we say, you know, these people in this group are your friends. If you want to talk about, like, we give out a worksheet at the end that says think hip. You know, you want to, trying to think what all the things are. Be responsible for yourself and others. Respect yourself. And if there's anything that you talked about or didn't talk about, you want to go to the people in the group that you feel comfortable with, but also you want to know that there are people in the community like your parents, if not your parents, your teacher, if not your teacher, maybe someone in your church or in your religious organization, but that you need to find someone that, because if you have a lot of kids that are passing or maybe feel uncomfortable talking about a certain issue, that if they can't talk about it now, that they need to talk about it with someone that they trust. And that we try to emphasize that maybe the adults in the group, that's why we really encourage teachers and administrators to participate, because we want, I think there are huge barriers between kids and those who they see as authority figures. That's why we try to use first names. You know, we try. Some people don't feel comfortable with that crossing, whatever, but
Do you specify that that occurs in this circle, but not beyond unless it's invited or something?
yes, that if, especially in the detention facility, because that's respect when you call someone Mrs. or Mr. or Miss whatever. They see it as disrespectful. If you just, hey, Johnny, you know.
Yeah, a lot of schools would too.
Exactly.
I mean, it would have to be something people were comfortable with.
And if they don't feel comfortable using their first name, fine, use your last name. That's, you know, that's fine, whatever they're comfortable with. But if we have adults in the group, then you can reassure the children or teenagers or whatever that are in the group that these people are your friends. And it's not only, you know, me, who you don't really know that well, who I'm going to be going to this school, you don't, you know, you may not have my phone number, unless they come to me and say, you know, can I call you sometime, you know, that's fine if they feel they want to talk about something further. But if it's only children in the group, or teenagers, they may not feel like their issues are being addressed. So that's why we really try to encourage, you know, principals and whatnot, because then the kids get to know people on a more personal basis. You have kids, you have a life outside of school. You know, you're not just our math teacher, you're not just a principal who I always, when I get in trouble, I have to go down and face you. You know, this person has a life and cares about what I feel. And at the end of the session, we have, I can actually pass this out. It's called Think Hip, and it's basically after we go through a basic or a mini session. It's things that hopefully we discussed, you brought up, and that you need to think about, and then if you need to discuss them, that you find that person that you feel you can trust if you have something that comes up.
Do you ever actually have them think right there on the spot and write down 2 or 3 people's names? Because I could see where that might be helpful. If you know, just take a moment and think about your church, your community, or a neighbor or something, and write down a couple names that if you needed to, you know, go.
No, I haven't, but that's a good idea. And if they have any questions about any of these, you know, we try to talk. We try to talk about it, because some of these, they may not, you know, see how they could actually, like, don't rely on weapons, drugs, or alcohol, they weaken you. And for some kids, they think, well, how can a weapon not make you powerful? You know, and then you can get into a whole, you know, and the kids, but then they understand it. If you, at least you talk about it, and they may not leave saying, wow, you know, I've been thinking all wrong. Guns, they do weaken me, but at least you talked about it and they can process it on their own. I don't think, like you said, if you have a mixed group, you know, huge mixed group in terms of you have 6th graders or 7th graders with adults, you're going to have a different processing. You know, adults, maybe they want to think about it, but then they want to talk about it. Kids, maybe they just want to think about it to themselves and not talk about it. You know, they want to go on to the next thing. It makes them feel uncomfortable if they have to have a response. You know, that's why we usually give this at the end, unless they bring something up. So.
If you know kind of what went into that, because I have a couple of concerns with that. Just generally, a lot of people I've talked with that work in confidential places, they may be psychologists or whatever, what I find that they do is they need to talk about something, and sometimes a lot of times I've been the one that they've talked to, or one of, there can be several, and usually don't give names. Sometimes they do, usually they don't. So it's not compromising the person's integrity, but there's that need to talk about what you hear, because you hear somebody's emotional outpouring, that creates an emotional response in you, and you need to deal with that somehow. So there's that concern. It doesn't seem to be recognized, and as a result, people violate, and they even say, I feel guilty about this, but I need to talk about it, things like that. The other person is in approaching people directly. I wonder if there's just some way, because I experienced this, I went through the healing racism, one of the workshops too, and I felt inhibited in doing that because they did the same thing. They said, don't approach somebody that's, talked about a specific thing. And as a result, it was really inhibiting to build up any kind of friendship or connection with people that I would have liked to. And I pretty much didn't, because I took it seriously. But I also noticed other people that just went ahead and naturally did that, and kind of maybe it didn't sink through to them. And it seemed like it was great that people made real connections. But for me, it was difficult. So there are those two problems that I see with that, and I wonder if the organizers or whatever have talked about dealing with that, balancing that at all, or
Well,
how do you deal with those things?
I think with the first issue, with the confidentiality, if it makes you feel a certain way when you hear someone, talk about whatever, experience they may have had, focus, I think if you talk to someone else, you need to focus on the way it made you feel, not necessarily what the person said. If I hear, a child tell me about an experience, maybe because they were sexually abused or whatever, that hits home with me for a reason, because that happened to me when I was younger, but I need to focus on how it made me feel, not necessarily what they told me.
You talk about in the group now.
In the group, or if someone comes to me outside the group, because...
But it's my